You know yourself how busy you are, and busyness, of course, will increase as you get older. And the basis for all your relationships, I should say our relationships as part of humanity, we have developed relationships with people, and we have developed activities, or we have activities imposed on us. Some of them are obligatory, some of them we choose, and others we are obliged in the sense that it is our occupation and we have to earn a living. But if you see all of these components, they're all orientated around a central feature. This we call I, because we develop relationships in order to sustain our sociability and our sense of self-image, to sustain our acceptability in a group. But when we analyze it, we see that it's no different from a sense of tribalism, just a bit more sophisticated. The more cultured we are, the more we expand our social circle, and we engage with people that we like, and we avoid people that we dislike. But inevitably, all our activities requires us to interact with people. And in order to sustain this operation, not only in the area of sociability, but also in the area of completing our duties, whatever it is, our work, and all our other kinds of involvements, then this is all orientated toward a more sophisticated version of survival. And that requires us to be attached. And attachment comes because we interpret the world in such a way that we feel that we are in an isolated condition against all kinds of unfair odds where we have to struggle against in the form of people and places and events. Now, in spiritual life, and all life is spiritual, with the idea that our destiny is to get out of this get up in the morning, go to work, go to bed syndrome, which endlessly repeated, even if you insert the most creative variety within it, you'll see that it constantly produces the struggle to be happy, the struggle to be to give life, meaning to life, and so on. There are certain things that nature has inserted in us that makes us less egocentric or selfish. But firstly, of course, our interpretation of who we are is the critical component within this, because what we call I is not as simple as we think. And so the first analysis comes to, who am I, what am I? And the first thing that comes to our mind is a physical being. A physical being that has certain characteristics in terms of appearance, in terms of history, in terms of growth. And the history comes also with a memory history. What we did at the age of 5, what we did at the age of 6. And that resurfaces all of our history in terms of all our activities that is given a stamp in a kind of library called the unconscious mind. All of that carries with us, and this also we incorporate into the sense of I. So when we say, what am I? We're looking at a complete package of mind and body combined. And it's not quite as simple as that, because the body itself is a very complex thing. If we take one simple cell, you see that the number of thousands and thousands of chromosomes that are required for one cell to operate, and all the various combinations that are required from 4 key chemicals, if you like. So guanine and all the rest of it, ACTG, that has so many different combinations. And the complexity of the cell seeming to operate independently, will combat viruses and will also operate in such a way that any adaptation that is required, supposing out of thousands and thousands and thousands of duplicate copies that are required to manufacture proteins, one mistake is made, then the mistake is rectified by a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and the whole cell cooperates in terms of correcting this. This is a wonderful marvel in biology, modern biology, that involves physiology and negates many of the theories to do with what is called the selfish gene. Now, The Selfish Gene is a book produced in the 1970s by Richard Dawkins. Many people know of him or have heard of him, and his almost evangelical movement towards atheism. So from his point of view, we are but simply robots. We are meandering and lumbering around. Lumbering robots is his literal term from his book, The God Delusion. So we are lumbering robots with no meaning. It just how happens to be coordinated. I think it was the great scientist Fred Hoyle who said, it seems to be impossible to me. It's like taking a junkyard and expecting a whirlwind by chance to assemble it into a Boeing 747. So the likelihood of that happening is quite remote, according to one of the greatest agnostics there, scientist Fred Hoyle. He saw the absurdity of this thing called chance. So are we in a situation which is just a chance? Or is there some direction toward which we are going? And if we're going toward a direction, it cannot just be end in the graveyard. That means there would be no real meaning to all this sophistication, all this struggling to move on, and an absolute abhorrence of death. So these are the various obstacles that we have to understanding a different thing, namely our own inherent freedom. And the obstacles start off with complete ignorance, a misunderstanding about what life is. So the key question is still, what is life? Now, what has that got to do with detachment? Well, everything actually, because it then snowballs into additional techniques or strategies. And from this misunderstanding of what the world is and what life is, we come to this unit which we call I. And in order to keep that going, we have a plus minus strategy, a kind of struggle moving toward the things that we enjoy, things which are pleasurable, against things which are painful, things which are desirable against things which are fearful. And the things which we find desirable, we cling on to. And this clinging is called attachment. And so inevitably, all pleasures, whether they are small or big, come from attachment. Let me give you some examples of attachment that you may not have been aware of. We are immediately attached to the body. We don't wish the body to leave us. We spend a fortune on preserving this body. We are attached to those people who are surrounding us, who we make friends with us, and form a support group, including family. There's a certain dependency that we have in this area, and this is also called attachment. We have attachment, naturally, to children. Not any children. We don't have any attachment to anybody else's children, but seemingly we have attachment only to our children. Now, every biological species is the same. We're not special in this regard. Then we have attachment to certain lifestyles, certain ways of behaving, and reluctance to change is a part of that. We have attachment to the cherished ideas that we have. We have attachment to certain types of expressions, cultural expressions. art, music. We have attachment to food because food can be pleasurable or can be simply there to sustain us. And don't forget, pleasure and attachment, they go together. So attachment is a great, great obstacle because it puts us in a narrow gauge. It puts us in a very small operational area where limited choice is, and we don't go any wider than that. And in order to advance, to grow, to introduce some level of interest and excitement in life, we have to go outside those borders, not into an extra foray rooted in dissatisfaction. We find satisfaction elsewhere and so on and so forth, a continuous looking for it. The decline in religion or interest in religions or any spiritual pursuits in the Western world, particularly in Europe and now in America and actually in other parts of the world now, is really, in my view, due to one attachment called entertainment. Technology has provided us with increasing multi-perception areas for our interest. So our attention is naturally easily diverted. We just have to go to, let us say, a public place, a train station or an airport, see people waiting. And they all have their heads down with their phones out. And they're all occupied. In a bus, you'll see it. And if you look around and see how many people are not engaged on their mobile phones, hardly anybody. It seems to be a spontaneous thing now, a habitual thing, that at any spare moment will occupy the mind with something that is interesting to us. Now that is an example of attachment. But the questioner asked me, do I have any examples in daily life of detachment? Well, detachment will be exactly the opposite. And we are automatically detached from the things that we're not attached to. We are detached from events going on in Iran or events going on in Somalia or Sudan or Yemen or South America or South Africa. Unless we actually come from these countries, we are detached from them. We are detached from our neighbors if we haven't been introduced. You know, there were two Englishmen who got stranded on a desert island. After 10 years, they were rescued. And when they got on the boat, they were asked, well, you must have had at least company during your sojourn on the desert island. They said, no, now that we have met each other on this boat for the first time, we are free to speak to each other. So you see, we put ourselves into a very narrow, restricted area. And in this area, there's not much scope for accessing beyond the boundaries of what we might call our restrictive slavery, our confinement, our imprisonment, as it were. There's a book called The Imprisoned Splendor by a beautiful Reynold Johnson, a beautiful scientist of the past who decided to investigate beyond the scope of normal science, so-called. So we can break out if we feel we are prisoners. We should find a way out, and we'll discover we weren't imprisoned at all. You'll find examples of birds, and a trap is set where there are bars, but some of those bars are flexible. They get into it, and then once they're in, they don't know how to get out because from their point of view, the whole thing is solid bars. Elephants, if we train Asian elephants to move logs or something like that, we catch an elephant, we tie the elephant's leg to a post so it can't move. Then even when the chain on the leg is removed, the elephant knows I cannot go beyond this restricted area. This form of conditioning is something for all of us. Life itself, if you will, circumstances themselves have seemingly conditioned ourselves. And you see, this is why we call it ignorance, because we are inherently free. So the first real lesson we have to know is that we are free. It's not that we can get freedom in the future, but we are free here and we are free now. That's a very important lesson. Where do we pick this lesson up? We pick it up from scripture. We pick it up from teachers. We pick it up from those people who have experienced this level of freedom and are able to exhibit this not only by their words, but also by their personalities. Why would one want to go beyond the borders of domestic help and try to have a spirit of generosity and service for the whole of humanity? This would be the characteristic of somebody of steady wisdom, operating for the welfare of the whole world. This expansion, the spirit of generosity, you won't really find in an egocentric position, selfish position, albeit morally good, albeit, leading a life which is not fraught with any major sins or anything like that. But that's not the point. The point is, we have eaten, in biblical terms, from the tree of good and evil, and these moral terms, this moral struggle is there, but it's there within a certain confinement. Freedom, that's something different. Now, if we are free, how is it that we feel that we are bound? It is because all these circumstances that I've mentioned, namely the body, namely the physical environment, the restrictive amount of choices that we have within it, the operation that we take for granted that happens automatically, where the divine acts as a lawmaker. And we'll soon maybe discover that through the art of discovery and prayer, we find that the supreme, beyond the scope of humanity, albeit that we may think of it as out there somewhere, remote somewhere, then we'll see that it's actually within everything, because when we examine the question, what is life? There we find the divine everywhere. When we ask, what is the reason why life is sustained in such a beautiful way? It is naturally because we come to a conclusion that this author of life is also the author of love. And there's every reason why we are loving beings, even if it's within a confined area, that there is a certain energy. And when the love that is received by us is thwarted, it turns to anger, but there's only one energy. So then we come to law, that everything is operating in a certain rhythm. So when you discover the nature of life, the nature of love, and the nature of rhythm or law, you're now getting closer to a kind of sense of withinness. And then when you turn to prayer, and when you turn to repetition of a mantra called japa, when you return to meditation, when all of this internal shifting is going on, we find we can glide across the borders of the physical, glide across the borders of the material, glide across the borders of self-centeredness, and there we find real connection and real prayer. But then what became of our attachment? It was left off by itself. So do we have some common examples of detachment in our life, other than selective detachment, whereby it just means we are remote from another situation? Well, you see, supposing you're a teenager or something and you fall in love with somebody. There's a reason why we say falling, it's a dangerous occupation. And then after about 6 months or a year, another person, much more attractive, comes along and we fall in love with that person. What becomes of our feeling for the first person? It falls away automatically. In fact, two teenagers, let's say, in love, to them they are detached from everything except each other. So when we talk about detachment, from a devotee point of view, we are really talking about attachment to your personal ideal of this highest entity that we call in religion God. Attachment to the divine personality of God automatically gives us detachment from everything else. This is an easy and natural way to practice detachment, and it has a prerequisite. All systems have it, and that is a discernment. We have to have some discernment. So these two things are inherent in practice. Discernment we call viveka, and the result of that will be detachment called vairagya. Now, detachment requires, for the meditator, the detachment of our attention from the external things and a shifting of it toward the internal things. This is detachment in the form of meditation. And this reshifting of attention is attachment, if you like, under the name of concentration. Concentration, something that is attractive. Instead of being attracted to the external things, entertaining things, we're now attracted to the undercurrent of it, the substratum of it, the thing that is deeper, the thing that is more blissful, the peace that passes the understanding. And when we dive there and get used to that, that is also, of course, a kind of attachment. Even that will fall away by itself, since we get the understanding from it of a complete and total oneness. So there's detachment necessary in meditation. But we cannot meditate unless our normal working life has this discernment and detachment also. Supposing we follow the path of what is called jnana yoga, that analyzes the world into two categories, the permanent and the impermanent, the real and the unreal. Asato ma sadgamaya, you see, lead us from the unreal to the real. Also, jyoti, lead us from the darkness to the light, lead us from the death to immortality. So this kind of discernment is going on, and it's not all a negation, because I want to find out what is the real and the permanent, not just what is the impermanent. I want to feel that there is something like a universal current flowing through everything. And then I come to a conclusion of as everything. So these are the progressive steps. We start off with in everything, then through everything, then as everything, then beyond everything. And the more we do that, the more we become automatically detached from the preceding value. Preceding value means I'm now more detached from the body. I'm detached from the mind and all its functions. I'm detached from self-image. I'm detached from what people think of me. I'm detached from the effects of my actions. Now in karma yoga, which we're all engaged in, that is doing action, karma means action. When we make it a yoga, a kind of unifying discipline, what are we doing? We are detaching from the results of our work. The result of it is we become much more efficient because our concentration is here and now. It is not fraught with anxiety about the effects from the future. And we're not distracted by commiserations about the past. It's all here and now. And if we add a sweetened thing to it, namely making all activities as offerings, divine offerings, flower offerings, if you will, or fruit offerings, if you will, to the divine beloved, then it becomes a kind of karma bhakti yoga. It becomes a sweet thing where we take all actions, but it means we are detached from the results. So in normal life, so-called, we cultivate this art of detachment by I'm not concerned with the results. Let the results come later. Because after all, you will discover that any effort that you put into something, the vast majority of its accomplishment is from sources beyond us. It is from the cooperation of other people, for example. It depends on the resources around us. It depends on the fundamental subtle forces of the universe to combine and to put into place the effect of our thinking, and all activity is preceded by thought. And thought is faster than the speed of light, and thoughtful prayer has more impact than 1,000 rituals or magic or any other thing. It actually mobilizes the entire force of the universe and delivers the result at our doorstep, whether we know it, whether we don't know it, whether we like it, whether we don't. And so all of this is accompanied by a sense of wonder, a sense of thankfulness, a sense of worship, a sense of appreciation for the other, which detracts from my attachment to myself, my own self-effort, my own concerns. This I and mine is the greatest danger, and if we can get round it in some way, in one of two ways. Either we can see the divine self in all objects, in all people, places, and events beyond us, beyond our narrow identity, then you'll find everything shifts. Immediately our attention is drawn to the concern of everybody, with the generosity of spirit, expanding our love to all. And then in the depths of meditation, we find that in ourselves. And when we find it in ourselves, we also automatically find it in others. So this too is a kind of detachment. This kind of discernment leads to detachment, vairagya. And these are the two things that have to be practiced. Now, we may find it extremely subtle. Let us take, for example, the small pleasure, as it were, of eating food. Everybody has a favorite food to eat, favorite dish. Then we have to question, am I doing this for my nourishment, or am I doing this for my pleasure, or is it a combination of the two? For most people, it's a combination of the two, but in some cases, it is for sheer pleasure. The chances are it may or may not be good for the health of the body. Don't give a child ice cream. Why not? Because Vaishvanara, the cosmic energy, is operating in you, what we call God, as Vaishvanara, digestive fire. It is God that digests your food. And you're giving something very difficult to digest, namely sugar combined with fat. We know that two things occur from that. One is that obesity can occur, and it occurs because it is also an attachment, and the attachment is also an addictive thing. When you combine fats, this is not my opinion, this is research, fats and carbohydrates, when you combine these two things, then fat occurs in the body and the taste buds become addicted eventually to the substance, to this combination. Ice cream is one such example. And when you put something cold in, you're dampening the digestive fire. You should surely have compassion. Poor God is trying to digest it. You're lowering the temperature. Poor fellow has to increase the temperature. We put it in a funny way. So we see that these attachments are a far cry from our basic ancestral needs, whereby people foraged for food. People do it even today in the Amazon forest and certain parts of the world. Their lifestyle is diminishing, no doubt, but they depend completely on their livelihood, on their living, literally their living, by hunting and gathering on a daily basis. They have no fridges or anything like that. So every day is a process of going to find something nourishing to eat. And experience of generations shows how skilled you can be at identifying the right thing. Most of our modern medicines really come from South America, from the jungles of South America or the jungles of Africa. We know, having coming from Africa, that there are tremendous tremendously useful medicinal herbs that are found in our bush, in our wild areas, and people over generations, it has been passed down from generation to generation. They're aware of what is good. This is called bushcraft. What is good to select, to eat, how to prepare it without poisoning yourself. So this is an appreciation of some basic needs, and we have put a sophistication on it through manufactured foods, for example. So this is an example of small attachment, and these kinds of attachments are dealt with by a life of discipline, by saying, here is a body made from food. If I eat the right food with the right attitude, it will manufacture, because this is a supreme manufacturer within me, it will be manufactured into limbs and cells which are highly complex in nature. They're broken down into sugars and converted into amino acids and ultimately manufactured in proteins where cell replication takes place, and the whole of the cell of the body, trillions and trillions of cells, know exactly what to do and how to react in a coordinated communal way, like a community. And we are completely unaware of it. What a marvelous thing that is. This is an example of where life shows us that there is some organizing, some intelligent, some conscious being beyond our awareness and beyond our scope, which is manifesting itself and operating in the living, working, waking life, and we are completely unaware of it, looking after us nicely. By attaching to that, by shifting our attention to that, we automatically leave off all the other things. It is very easy to divert our attention in this way and to detach it from one thing and attach it to another. For example, we can be talking here, and outside your house there could be an almighty car crash, and people will be running out, and they could be doing the most involved things in their houses, but immediately they all run. Something has caught their attention. We can be arguing with each other, and a friend comes to visit, knocks on the door, and the argument gets detached, and we attach our attention to the incoming person for hours together. And if we can do it for hours together, we can do it for further hours together. We can do it for days, we can do it for years, we can do it for months, we can do it forever. It just requires a will that is prepared to shift our habit level by inserting new habits, detaching from one and attaching to another. When we see the divine self in all beings, and all beings there in the self, what we call the self, that divine aspect within everything, then we are automatically detached from other things and attached to the self until ultimately all of that is transcended. So that's a fundamental practice for those reasons, the practicing detachment. Are there any other examples? Of course, we all detach, as I've mentioned, and we can all attach. But you see, in this whole question of attachment and detachment, there is one factor, and that is there's a controlling, executing entity that is making a decision and exercising its will and is making a movement in a certain direction. Now that independent entity, that is your fundamental you, that is your fundamental self. And the whole of our practice is designed to access that in whatever way we can. So this is what is necessary. This is what is known as practice. It means the practice of vairagya, that is, viveka, that is discernment, followed by vairagya. If you pick up the book Raja Yoga, which is a foundation book I give everybody, then you'll see it clearly mentioned in a very short aphorism. What is practice? Because it's necessary to practice, and it's in the context of concentration. And there, by practice is meant the practice of discrimination, discernment, and detachment. We can view detachment in this sense not only as a discipline, but also as an effect. Because whenever we discriminate, discern, we automatically detach from things which are damaging to us. Now, then the question may arise, is it wrong to be attached to your family? No. You see, there's no right or wrong in this. It is only a level. So by attaching to the family, we become less self-orientated. It's a good thing. But then we have to go further. We have to then say, all right, so I'm attached to my family. It's not that I should detach from them, but I should use that to stimulate my spiritual fire, as it were. And I should use all my interrelationships as a worship. Because they're so close to me, it is easy to do, unless they're teenagers. Well, no, I retract that. I'm just poking fun. So, by attaching to your family, for example, then we can, and then introducing an internal, deeper spiritual insight that you are serving your family, doing the best for it, not as a family, not as fellow creatures, or even as an extension of a genetic bloodline, but as a gift from the divine that gives me the opportunity to see God in them and then to act, to respond accordingly. When I add this extra dimension, it also adds a level of richness that wasn't there previously. And I then become much more attached, not to the person, but to the entity that sits within the person. That is important. The means of destruction of ignorance, says Patanjali, is the unbroken practice of discrimination. This is the real goal of practice, and Swami Vivekananda is making a commentary on this. Discrimination between the real and the unreal, knowing that the Purusha, that is, that fundamental I underneath everything that never changes. Purusha derived from two terms, Puri, a city, and Purna, meaning fullness, in case we think there's a confinement somewhere. That the Purusha is not nature, that it is neither matter nor is it mind, and that because it is not nature, it cannot possibly change, because nature changes. It is only nature which changes, combining, recombining, dissolving continually. When, through constant practice, we begin to discriminate, ignorance will vanish, and the Purusha will begin to shine in its real nature. And its real nature is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. And then he mentions that this knowledge that you gain from this is of the sevenfold highest ground. And then he talks about the practice of different parts of yoga, of impurities being destroyed. Then knowledge becomes effulgent up to discrimination. So you see, all of this practice will lead to this, ultimately, this detachment. And it starts with our discernment, and this discernment is purely there to take off the root of our misunderstanding, described as ignorance. And there being an absence of that ignorance, there's an absence of a junction, a union, which is the thing to be avoided, because that is attachment. When we see that there's a junction, We identify ourselves with the material body, which is changing, you must have noticed, and the material mind, which is also changing. There's every reason why we have that expression, to change your mind. So all of that is to be avoided, that kind of union, that kind of junction, and that is to expose the independence of the one that is seeing, the actual seer. So there it is, detachment. We have to look to our daily life for our own examples, of course, to see what is it that I am attached to, and then what measures will I take to divert the energy that goes into this attachment into something else that creates a detachment from that particular object or person or place or thing. You know, there are people who don't have children and they're attached to other things such as animals, attached to cats or dogs or any other such pets which are there. And what is the state of these people when the cat dies? The cat has a shorter life than ourselves, and dog too, and there's a lot of grieving. Attachment creates grieving. There's a story, of course, of that great sage who became Bharat. And anyway, he was a great king and decided, okay, I've lived a good life. I now should retire to the forest and attend to this inherent goal in life, namely to my freedom. I'll meditate in the forest. Then he saw a foal belonging to a deer. The mother had died and the foal was struggling, and the king, who is now retired in the forest, he, out of compassion, rescues the little deer and feeds it milk, and feeds it every day, looks after it like a mother. But the deer grows up older and older and older, and as the deer grows up, it wanders further and further away from the hermitage, until day and night the king sage is now looking out, the renunciant is looking out, and concerned like a mother, looking out of the forest, calling its name and waiting for it to come. Now circumstances, to cut a long story short, was it grieved because out of attachment to this deer. And out of this attachment, of course, when this person dies, they get reborn. How are they reborn? As a deer, because that's what they were attached to. So there's another formula. Whatever you are attached to, that you will become, because you are so concerned about it. It's occupying all your energy. It becomes your magnificent obsession. You eat it, you drink it, you sleep it. Well, we can easily take that tendency and steer it more toward this presence of this Purusha, this divine within you, this God within, this kingdom of heaven within not only you but all, and understand through what is life, what is love, and what is law. And when we find the answers to these questions, there's every reason to divert all our loving attention toward that. And that is a significant gradual shift, so that we glide across the borders of so-called imprisonment into the area of freedom by itself, easily and naturally. So these are the things that are required. Well, I hope I answered your question sufficiently. And it's something that you can dwell on. Well, if there are no further questions, we leave it at that. But all of these things that come out, all these questions and answers that come out, are worth dwelling on and putting into practice if there are some practical things that come out from it. So with that, love and blessings to everyone. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
so
think
much.
Thank you.